how to do that. We get in front of a problem and we immediately start looking for what it could be. We go down some checklist that's in our mind, or we go down a checklist on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. And that's good, it's useful. That's what we're trained to do, to see and understand in our particular fields what things might be the problem. But on the other hand, if you're strictly going down a list looking for certain factors, it's hard to see the whole picture. So we have to develop that skill, and I suggest that you can develop that skill. When you walk out the room and wherever you go, whatever happens in your daily life, try to remind yourself to step back when you have a situation and look at the whole picture briefly. And one of the discussions that came up that's a good example of this is an accident investigation that Brian remembered from his youth, and that's exactly what was happening. The investigators were looking to fill slots in their predefined little patterns and never stepped back to look at the whole situation and ask if it made sense. So he's going to explain that little situation to us.
So, you know, over 25 years ago on M40 in Hamilton, there was a head-on collision between a semi and a car. And when the police arrived, upon arrival, you know, they had to determine what the cause of the accident or who was at fault. So the evidence was that the driver of the car could not remember what happened. There were no witnesses who saw the actual accident. The truck driver actually said that the car had crossed the center line, and then there were some gouge marks that were in the road that appeared to be from where the tire and tie rod assembly was tore off the front of the car. So based on that information, it was determined that the car had crossed the center line because the gouge marks were on the semi side of the road. And but from there was actually one piece of evidence that actually was being ignored. There was a bicyclist that was involved or was actually there, and he was actually on the side of the road, riding on the narrow shoulder of the road, the same side as the semi was. So as the actual accident occurred, the boy actually headed for the ditch to get out of the way, and he himself as well did not really see the accident. He just knew that happened was in ditching it. So everyone's attention at that time went to the drivers of both the car and the semi, and no one actually at the time really noticed the boy. So the question is, did the police really see all the evidence or the possible scenarios? You know, what might have happened? You know, what about the boy on the bike? Was he involved? And how was he involved? What about the gouge marks in the road? Those are right here. So what about those gouge marks? And they were running at an angle away from the center line of the road. So, you know, based on that, you know, here are a couple of closing questions I guess I have. You know, oops, where are we at? There we are. Why is that in there? Oh, maybe in there.
You're good, yep.
Okay, anyway, sorry about that. Is it possible for the semi to pass the boy while he is riding his bike on the shoulder of the road without hurting him? You know, could that semi stay in that lane? And could it be that the semi crossed the center line and actually had hit the car? You know, there's a possible scenario drawn there of what might have it looked like. And if you don't look at all the evidence, so if the police they didn't look at all the evidence, you may end up not seeing all the possible conclusions. So at this time, we're actually going to turn it back over to Chris and talk a bit.
I actually don't need that. So.
Okay, all right.
Debbie wanted me to give another one of my fine manufacturing stories. I think part of our friendship is built on me coming to her and saying, "You'll never believe what happened today at work." So
This one interfered with our beer drink.
yes, it did. So we were involved with a customer audit. It was actually day 2 of the audit. I had a very meticulous, anal auditor in, and he was going through and doing our quality systems audit. Like most auditors, he had his little check sheet So as he asked a question, he had a reference, and he was looking for specific items to verify that we had the information needed. We were going through the audit. Like I said, we were in day 2 about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's been very long for me at this point, and we started working in corrective and preventative actions. So I started asking for examples of corrective and preventative actions, and I started pulling up the documents and showing them. And he pulled out his little check sheet, and here's where some of the problems started happening. He had things that he needed to look for, like quality circles, 5 whys, fishbone diagrams, is not diagrams, Pareto analysis, for example. The problem was that for every corrective and preventative action I opened up, he wanted to see every one of those tools being used in that corrective action. So we were into about the 4th corrective action, and he kept mumbling and grumbling, saying, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And I kept going back and saying, here's an example of a 5Y, here's an example of a fishbone, here's an example of where we're using quality circles to drive the business metrics, to drive improvements, how we're measuring it. Wasn't happy. So after about 20 minutes of that, I finally turned to him and I said, look, our job in quality is not to use every tool in your toolkit for every problem. One of the basic jobs in quality is to identify what tool in your toolkit works best for fixing that problem, and then you implement it. Bottom line is why do you want to use a screwdriver to fix a pipe when you have a pipe wrench in your toolbox? So afterwards, we shared some beers and shared some laughter, and made it through.
Did not
And
shoot
yes,
the auditor,
and-
even though we wrote that up there to remind us of what we might have wanted to do.
More than once.
So, problem-solving methodology is applicable to problems that happen and also applicable to problems that we create for ourselves. And years ago, I heard a presentation from the Nickel Development Institute about this very interesting corrosion mechanism called accountant-induced corrosion. Anybody ever hear that?
Saving a penny, spending a dollar.
The specific example was some pretty expensive structures that were to be used offshore for some oil drilling rigs. And that's a lot of material. It's a big structure. And the engineers who specified it said, you need ink and